In Cumberland County, a courthouse ledger hides a stain no family would speak aloud. 7 women disappeared after childbirth between 1832 and 1839. Their vanishings threaded back to one estate and a single patient man. If you want to walk closer to what others bury, subscribe, tell us where you are listening from, and type "The veil is broken" twice in the comments to seal this truth within you. Mercy and Charity Goodwin arrived at Rosemont orphaned and penniless, identical in face, the kind of sisters who made strangers stop to stare. Jeremiah Whitlow appeared as Providence, wealthy, 38, unmarried, with pale eyes that measured rather than loved. He proposed something that resembled Charity, but functioned as controlled Mercy, his wife-in-law, and Charity, his wife in heart, both to live beneath his roof. To 2 women without guardianship it felt like sanctuary, to Whitlow it was design. Rosemont gleamed with imported furniture and chandeliers, a mansion polished to hide the smudges beneath. Whitlow collected portraits and hired a governess to sculpt the sisters into immaculate deportment, prescribing routines and baths designed to preserve flawlessness. As the pregnancies advanced, his interest became inspection. Dr. Fletcher arrived often with a heavy bag and hands that betrayed nerves. The sisters shared a recurring dream, a distant infant cry and women calling from beneath timbers, voices that felt like memory rather than imagination. Small details accumulated into dread. Mercy found a locked closet on the 3rd floor. Charity found stained tools in the carriage house, though no animals were slaughtered. One night Charity triggered a hidden latch and descended by candle to a cellar carved from red clay beneath the house. On shelves lay personal effects of women the county had listed missing: a cream wedding gown, silver brushes engraved MC, journals ending mid-sentence, a music box with a dancer in a matching dress. 7 collections sat like evidence, and names were scratched into clay: Margaret Crawford, 1832, Sarah Henley, 1833, Rebecca Patterson, 1834, Anna Louise Mackenzie, 1835, Catherine Vaughan, 1836, Elenina Pierce, 1837, Helen Gardner, 1838. Charity felt the room close on her as the truth came. Disappearance here was not accident but design, lives catalogued and stored, and Mercy's child placed at the center of a commerce that treated humanity as inventory. Now Charity understood that escape would demand cunning, that comfort had been engineered into control, and that the coming days would decide whether truth or silence endured, and fate watched. That night, Charity whispered her discovery into Mercy's ear, their swollen bellies brushing together as they clutched each other like shipwrecked sailors adrift in a sea of velvet lies. The names carved into the clay wall echoed louder than any sermon. 7 women who had once been flattered, cherished, promised safety, and then erased. Mercy trembled, whispering, "We must go tonight." But the corridors of Rosemont were not hallways, they were veins carrying blood to Whitlow's heart. Every exit was watched. Samuel, the mute groundskeeper, appeared at every corner. Mrs. Donovan, the housekeeper with a voice thick as peat, shadowed their movements with forced kindness, and Dr. Fletcher's daily visits felt less like care and more like surveillance, his quill scratching notes while his eyes refused to meet theirs. Jeremiah's presence grew heavier. He sat by their fireside, reading poetry in tones so flat they sounded like incantations. He studied their faces, their hands, their posture, reminding them always, "You must remain perfect. Perfection is our covenant with Providence." His words were wrapped in tenderness, but the edge beneath them cut. The sisters began to notice the rhythm of the house, the way the walls carried whispers, the way footsteps echoed where no servant walked. Mercy confided that at night she felt eyes pressing against her skin from behind the wallpaper, as if hollow corridors snaked through Rosemont like intestines, with watchers crawling inside. The days grew colder. Charity dared to return to the cellar in stolen moments, fingers brushing the remnants of women who had once been daughters, wives, mothers. Margaret Crawford's journal, the last entries, spoke of a husband whose devotion was suffocating, who consulted physicians about contingencies, who smiled as though listening to a voice that others could not hear. Each page ended abruptly, words trailing into silence. It was not death Charity read, it was interruption. Meanwhile, Mercy watched the staff. Donovan received visitors after dusk, coarse men with boots caked in mud who slipped into the house carrying crates. Samuel did not tend gardens but monitored roads, reporting strangers to Whitlow in hushed gestures. Rosemont, Charity realized, was not merely a home, It was an apparatus, a machine, and Jeremiah Whitlow was not a man but the operator of a system that transformed human life into possession. Each night, the twins whispered of escape. Each morning, they awoke to tighter boundaries, smaller freedoms, and the knowledge that Mercy's child would soon decide everything. The mansion grew colder, not from weather, but from what the walls remembered. And always, in the silence between heartbeats, they heard it, the faint, impossible cry of an unseen infant beneath the floor. By January of 1839, the air inside Rosemont was thick with dread, though Whitlow insisted it was the blessed hush before renewal. Mercy's labor approached, and with it came the suffocating certainty that one of them, or perhaps both, would vanish like the 7 women before. Charity counted the hours, memorizing the schedules of servants, listening for the hinges that groaned differently, as though revealing secret doors. She kept Margaret Crawford's journal beneath her mattress, its unfinished words burning into her as prophecy. Whitlow began holding candlelit gatherings in the grand parlor. Not balls, not dinners, but something closer to ritual. He summoned local men, merchants, magistrates, even the sheriff, and had Mercy and Charity sit in silence while the men studied them, their eyes crawling like ants. Whitlow spoke of the purity of lineage and the necessity of sacrifice. When Charity protested that she was not property, the room laughed, not crudely but coldly, as if her words had betrayed an ignorance of the natural order. One night Charity dared to test the house itself. She pressed her ear against the wallpaper in the north corridor, where she swore she had heard murmurs hollow. She tapped softly, 3 times. From the other side, replied a single knock. The blood froze in her veins. She traced the sound to a panel behind a portrait of Whitlow's mother. With effort, the wood shifted just enough to reveal darkness beyond, a crawlspace cut through the bones of the mansion. Within, she glimpsed candles guttering, shelves of ledgers, and something else. A cradle, lined in white, though no child lay within. She sealed the panel before footsteps approached. Mercy grew weaker as her body strained under the child's weight. She confided to Charity that she had begun seeing a woman at the foot of her bed, a pale figure in a wedding gown, face blurred, arms outstretched. She whispers, Mercy said, voice breaking. She says the child must not live here. Charity begged her to stay strong, but deep inside she knew the vision was not hallucination. It was memory, pressed into the wood, bleeding through time. Dr. Fletcher's hands trembled more each day. Once, when Whitlow left the room, he leaned close to Charity and hissed, run, before the birth. Do not stay for the christening. His eyes darted to the door, then dropped to the floor, as though the walls themselves would punish him for speaking. That night, Charity lay awake, her twin breathing shallow beside her, and she realized escape would not be chosen. It would be stolen. For Rosemont was not a home but a snare, and soon the house would tighten, and the ledger would claim an 8th name. The birth began in the black hours before dawn. A storm clawed across the fields, rattling Rosemont's windows like bones in a crypt. Candles lined the hall as servants hurried, their faces tense, their eyes never meeting Charity's. Dr. Fletcher arrived with his bag, the metallic clink of instruments betraying more than medicine. Whitlow paced outside the chamber door, every strike of his boots deliberate, rehearsed, as if he were keeping rhythm for some invisible choir. Mercy screamed through the night, her fingers gripping Charity's so tightly the nails drew blood. Sweat poured, prayers dissolved into sobs, and then silence, a silence too sudden, too complete. Charity's chest locked in terror until a wail shattered it, the newborn's cry, raw and human, cutting through the house like judgment. Whitlow entered at once, his pale eyes shining. A son, he announced, voice heavy with triumph. He lifted the child not like a father, but like a collector handling a specimen. The bloodline continues. Mercy, half-conscious, reached feebly for her baby, but Whitlow turned away. Charity's fury burned hotter than her fear, but Fletcher's trembling hand on her arm warned her into stillness. Hours blurred. The child was taken to the nursery on the 2nd floor, guarded day and night. Mercy slept fitfully, whispering fragments of hymns, clutching Charity's sleeve as though her sister's presence tethered her to the earth. But Charity heard something else. A chorus beneath Mercy's moans, the echo of those same cries from under the floorboards. Only now, with an infant alive in the house, The phantom cries multiplied, sharper, desperate, overlapping like a congregation begging to be released. The staff grew stranger. Samuel, the groundskeeper, dragged heavy crates into the storm cellar, each one leaking crimson through the wood slats before being covered with earth. Donovan polished silver in the parlor while humming lullabies, though no child had ever been raised in Rosemont before. The guests returned, their whispers seeping under doors. The child is secured, the covenant upheld, providence rewarded. Charity's mind raced. She had seen the ledger. 7 names already carved into the clay. Now Mercy's name hovered like a blade above parchment. If Whitlow had built Rosemont as a shrine to blood and inheritance, then the child was not blessing but anchor, a living chain binding them to his design. That night, as thunder rolled and lanterns guttered in their glass, Charity swore an oath in silence. Rosemont would not take her sister. The house had devoured too many. If blood was demanded, then blood would answer, but not hers, not Mercy's. And for the first time, the walls seemed to listen. The days following the birth bent into something unreal, as though Rosemont itself had shifted into a deeper shadow. Mercy, frail and pale as parchment, lay in her bed with trembling hands that never again touched her child. Whitlow kept the boy near him, parading him through the halls with a zeal that curdled Charity's stomach. "He is the vessel," Whitlow murmured often, rocking the infant as if soothing himself rather than the child. "Through him, all shall be perfected." His words were less paternal and more liturgical, each syllable echoing like the refrain of an ancient oath. Charity watched everything with sharpened senses. She noticed how Fletcher lingered at the nursery door, his eyes sunken with guilt, his lips pressed tight as though every word he swallowed corroded him inside. She saw Donovan polishing a silver christening cup, etched with initials not belonging to Mercy's child. The initials M.C., Margaret Crawford, matching the first name carved into the clay wall below. The christening loomed. Invitations were sent to men of station, judges, merchants, landowners, who arrived with wives in stiff silken rings that caught the candlelight like weapons. They gathered in the grand hall, the cradle placed at the center upon a dais, surrounded by roses that filled the room with a sweetness so thick it suffocated. Whitlow raised his glass and intoned words of blessing, but they sounded more like contracts, bargains sealed in wine and blood. Charity stood beside Mercy, whose body seemed to fold inward with every phrase spoken. At one moment, the infant cried, a piercing, mortal cry. Yet layered beneath it, Charity swore she heard others, a chorus of children never carried beyond the walls, the unborn wailing in unison, their grief soaked into timber and stone. That night, when the guests retired, Charity crept again to the hidden panel behind Whitlow's mother's portrait. She pushed into the crawl space, her candle flickering against ledgers stacked high. Each ledger held columns of names, women, infants, dates, notations in Whitlow's hand. Some ended with the word secured. She flipped to the newest page and froze. There, under February 1839's Mercy Goodwin, pending, Charity Goodwin, reserve, infant male, secured. Her candle sputtered, and in its failing light she saw something else. Against the wall stood 7 small coffins, lined in rotting silk, lids closed but leaking faint smells of earth and decay. On each lid, carved initials matched the names on the clay wall below. Charity dropped the ledger, her breath catching in a scream that dared not rise. The house had not simply consumed women, it had harvested them. And now the ledger whispered of her own place in the order. Charity returned to Mercy's chamber, her dress streaked with dust, her hands trembling with the memory of those coffins. Mercy stirred weakly, whispering through cracked lips, "Sister, the child, does he cry?" as if from 2 mouths. Charity froze. Mercy, though half-conscious, had heard it too. The layered cries, the voices beneath the infant's wail. She grasped Charity's hand, nails sinking deep. "Promise me," she begged, "if they take me, you will not let him grow in this house." At dawn, Whitlow entered. His composure was immaculate, coat pressed, hair slicked, the child cradled against him like an heirloom. He regarded Mercy with something that might have been affection if not for the steel beneath it. "Rest," he told her. "Your part is almost fulfilled." Then he turned to Charity, his pale gaze locking onto hers. "And you, my dear, you will learn obedience soon enough. The house accepts only those who bend." The christening feast became grotesque theatre. Whitlow stood at the head of the table, the infant displayed as centerpiece, while guests toasted not the child's health but the continuance of order. Fletcher's hand shook so violently he spilled wine, drawing a reprimand from Whitlow. Donovan clapped her hands, leading servants in a hymn so discordant it seemed to vibrate the chandeliers. And through it all, Charity felt the house itself pulsing, listening, absorbing every word. That night she resolved to act. She stole into the nursery while Donovan slept in her chair by the door. The cradle rocked gently, though no hand touched it. The child's face glowed pale in the moonlight, eyes wide open, unblinking. Charity leaned down, whispering a promise to the infant, that he would not become another ledger entry, another possession. But as she did, she heard it again, the chorus of cries, louder this time, coming not from beneath the floor, but from within the very walls. Suddenly, a floorboard groaned. Fletcher emerged from the shadows, his face grey with terror. "You must go," he hissed, clutching her arm. "Tonight, take the child if you can." Charity's heart pounded. "Why do you help me?" she demanded. Fletcher's eyes glistened. "Because I have buried too many?" he whispered, voice breaking. "Because every time I close a coffin, I hear them. And now I cannot silence them any longer." Before he could say more, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Whitlow's voice carried, calm, measured, but sharp as a blade. "Charity, where are you?" Fletcher pushed her toward the cradle. "Decide now," he breathed. "Or tomorrow? The house decides for you." Charity's pulse thundered in her ears as Whitlow's footsteps drew nearer, each step deliberate, like a hunter circling a snare. The nursery smelled of milk and roses, the sweetness so thick it turned her stomach. The infant stirred, tiny fists twitching, eyes catching a glint of moonlight as if reflecting something older, something not fully human. Charity gathered him into her arms, his warmth both fragile and heavy with consequence. Fletcher's hand guided her toward the far corner where another panel, smaller, less obvious than the portrait passage, waited. Whitlow's hand touched the door handle. His voice, calm as always, seeped through the wood. "Charity, do not force me to teach you pain. You are meant for better things." Fletcher shoved the panel open, the scent of damp earth rushing out. Charity slipped inside, clutching the child against her chest. The panel sealed behind them a heartbeat before the nursery door swung wide. She heard Whitlow's shoes scrape the floor, the silence that followed, then a low chuckle that made her skin crawl. The crawl space was narrow, forcing her to stoop. Fletcher led with a candle, its flame casting monstrous shadows against clay walls etched with strange marks, circles, crosses, symbols layered atop one another as if generations had scrawled bargains into the dirt. The cries returned here, clearer than ever, not echoes now, but voices, women's voices. They whispered names, prayers, warnings. Mercy's name was among them. Fletcher stopped before a rotting wooden stair spiraling downward. "This is where he keeps them," he muttered. "The ones no one names aloud." Charity's arms tightened around the infant, who whimpered, his tiny cries blending seamlessly into the spectral chorus, until she could no longer tell where the living ended and the dead began. They descended. The air grew colder, slick with the scent of lime and decay. At the bottom stretched a chamber lit by guttering lanterns. Coffins lined the walls, 7 in total, their lids marked not with initials but with carvings of roses, each rose different, as if each represented a life stolen. On a central table lay ledgers, open to pages waiting for fresh entries. Charity staggered closer, her breath sharp with rage. In the newest ledger, her name stared back at her, Charity Goodwin Reserve. And beneath it, written in a hand too deliberate to be mistaken, Mercy Goodwin, to be closed upon the child's baptism. The infant whimpered louder, and the walls responded, whispering in unison, a command that chilled her soul: "Do not let him remain here." Fletcher's candle shook violently. "You see now," he said, his voice raw. "This house is no home. It is a mouth, and tomorrow it will eat again." Charity's knees nearly buckled as the truth solidified around her. Rosemont was not simply a house. It was a tomb that never stopped hungering. The coffins pressed against the walls like swollen teeth, each one gnawing on memory, each one whispering of unfinished lives. She clutched the infant tighter, his skin hot against hers, his wail now indistinguishable from the chorus of the dead. Fletcher set the candle on the ledger table, his hands trembling. "He tells himself it is providence," the doctor whispered, his voice trembling with years of guilt. "That bloodlines must be purified, that women are vessels. But I have watched him order graves dug, watched him stand smiling as the soil covered them. Do you think I do not hear their cries? Every night I hear them." His eyes brimmed with tears, and for a moment, Charity glimpsed a man buried under his own cowardice, the infant writhed, tiny fists beating against her chest. Charity rocked him, whispering soothing nonsense, though her own heart raced toward panic. She looked again at the ledger, the names carved with cold precision. Her hand brushed against the quill left in its inkwell. Rage surged. She wanted to scratch every name out, to rip the pages to shreds, to make them vanish as violently as they had lived. But then she saw a blank space beneath her name, waiting, as if the page itself anticipated her fate. Suddenly, the chamber shifted. The lantern flames guttered as a draught of air swept through, carrying with it the scent of roses so strong it gagged her. Fletcher stiffened. He knows we're here. Above them, footsteps reverberated through the beams, measured, patient, deliberate. Whitlow was descending, Charity's grip on the infant tightened, her fingernails digging into his swaddling. Her thoughts spun wildly. Should she flee back through the crawl space, hide among the coffins, or confront the man whose voice still echoed in every corridor of her nightmares? Mercy's words returned to her, faint but insistent. "Promise me, do not let him grow in this house." Charity's breath steadied, though fear burned in her veins like fire. She turned to Fletcher, her voice sharp with sudden resolve. "If he comes down here, one of us must not leave alive." The doctor's face blanched, but he did not argue. Above them, the footsteps grew louder, each one closer, each one dragging the weight of inevitability. And then Whitlow's voice descended with him, calm, patient, but edged with triumph. "Charity, you were never meant to see this. But since you have, the house will decide whether you are vessel or sacrifice." Whitlow's figure emerged from the stairwell, lantern in hand, casting long bars of light across the chamber. His face was carved in shadow, his pale eyes gleaming like coins at the bottom of a well. The infant whimpered in Charity's arms, and Whitlow's lips curved into something too measured to be called a smile. "You hold him," he said softly, as if speaking to a servant entrusted with a fragile relic. "Good. You feel his weight, the warmth of continuation. That is the future. That is what all this is for." He swept his lantern across the room, illuminating the coffins, the ledgers, the clay walls etched with names. "They are the foundation," he whispered reverently. "Without them, he would not be possible. Every life given, every vessel emptied, prepared the way for him." Charity's stomach churned, but she forced her voice steady. "You murdered them." Whitlow's eyes flicked to her, unblinking. "I preserved them. Do you not hear them? They are not gone. They are here. They whisper because they are grateful. Through sacrifice, they remain part of something eternal." He stepped closer, his free hand outstretched. "No, give him to me. It is time to complete the covenant." The voices in the walls rose in fury, no longer whispers but a chorus of anguish. "Do not give him. Do not let him remain." The infant's cries twined with theirs, high and frantic. Charity's arms tightened, her entire body coiling against Whitlow's demand. Fletcher stepped forward, his own voice breaking. "Jeremiah, enough. The covenant is madness. You've turned faith into rot." His hand hovered near his coat, where something bulged, a flask of spirit perhaps, or something sharper. Whitlow's pale eyes fixed on him, the calm cracking at last. "You are weak, Fletcher. You always were. You bury your guilt in drink, but still you obey, because deep down you know I am right. This house, this bloodline, it is bigger than us all." Charity's rage surged like fire through dry timber. "No," she spat, her voice echoing against stone. "This house is not eternal. It is a mouth, and mouths can starve." Whitlow's face hardened, the softness vanishing, replaced by steel. "Then you have chosen," he said, "and the house will take you, as it took the others." He advanced, lantern blazing, shadows writhing like specters on the walls. The voices screamed now, Mercy's among them, urgent, pleading. Charity's grip on the infant burned with resolve. If Whitlow reached her, she knew either she would fall into the ledger's blank space, or she would tear the covenant from Rosemont's heart with her own hands. Wetlow's boots struck the clay with the rhythm of a funeral march. Each step sent tremors through the chamber, as though the house itself moved with him. The lantern's light swung across the coffins, catching on brass handles dulled with rust, on carved roses that seemed to wilt and blacken in the flicker. The infant's cries sharpened, almost shrieks now, each one tearing into Charity's chest like claws. "Charity," Whitlow said, his tone soft but laced with command. "Do not let fear consume you. You were chosen, both of you. Mercy brought forth the vessel. You will guard him. That is the covenant. That is perfection." He extended his hand palm upward, as though summoning not just the child but her very will. Fletcher shifted at her side, pulling something from his coat, a scalpel, its steel catching the lantern glow. His voice cracked but did not falter. "One more step, Jeremiah, and I will open you like the graves you've dug." Whitlow stopped. He regarded Fletcher not with fear but with disdain. "You," he murmured, "you've hidden behind my will for years. Every death you called medicine, every burial you called mercy. Do not pretend you were not my accomplice." His words sank into the doctor like knives, and Fletcher staggered as if struck. The walls trembled with whispers, angry now, insistent. The names etched in clay seemed to pulse in the lantern light, as though the dead pressed their foreheads against the barrier, desperate to be heard. Charity felt her resolve harden into something unbreakable. She shifted the infant to one arm, the other closing around the quill left in the ledger. Its point was sharp enough to draw blood. Whitlow stepped closer, his pale eyes fixed on the child. "Give him to me," he commanded, his voice rising for the first time. "He belongs to Rosemont. He belongs to me?" "No," Charity said, her voice ringing with fury. "He belongs to no one." Whitlow lunged. In that heartbeat, Fletcher moved, thrusting the scalpel toward his chest. The blade struck flesh, but Whitlow's hand snapped out, catching Fletcher's wrist, twisting it until bone cracked. Fletcher screamed, the scalpel clattering to the ground. Charity's moment had come. She drove the quill into the ledger, not on the blank space reserved for her name, but straight through Whitlow's own signature scrawled across the page. Ink splattered like blood, the parchment tearing as if the house itself groaned in protest. The lantern flared, the coffins rattled violently. The chorus of voices erupted into a scream so loud it shattered glass above, raining shards like black stars. Whitlow froze, his pale eyes widening, his hand releasing Fletcher's wrist. For the first time, his calm cracked into raw, human fear, and the house began to turn against him. The chamber shook as though the earth itself had revolted. Dust rained from the rafters, and the coffins along the walls banged open one by one, lids slamming against stone. From within poured a stench of rotten roses, a sickly perfume of death wrapped in Whitlow's favorite flower. Wisps of grey light rose from the opened coffins, forms half seen, women in veils and gowns, their faces blurred yet familiar. Margaret, Sarah, Rebecca, Anna Louise, Catherine, Eleonina, Helen. They hovered in the air like smoke given voice. Their whispers no longer restrained but joined in one terrible cry, "Break the covenant." Whitlow staggered back, lanterns swinging wildly. "No," he shouted, his voice cracking with something unthinkable. "Panic! You are bound to me! You were preserved! You belong to Rosemont!" But the spirits surged, circling him, their whispers slicing into words: murderer, thief, defiler. The infant in Charity's arms wailed in harmony, his tiny body trembling against her chest. Charity clutched him tighter, her tears hot with fury. Fletcher, groaning from his shattered wrist, crawled to the fallen scalpel. Blood streamed down his arm, but he dragged himself upright, pressing his back to the ledger table. "It's ending, Jeremiah," he rasped. "They are no longer yours." Whitlow turned on Charity, his eyes blazing, no longer calm but rabid. "You did this! You corrupted the covenant! You think you can break what I built! This house is mine! It breathes because of me!" He lunged, reaching for the child. Charity pivoted, clutching the infant close, and shouted over the roar of voices, "No, this house breathes because of them." She slammed the torn ledger shut, the quill still piercing his signature like a nail through flesh. The effect was instant. The walls cracked with deafening force, clay splitting to reveal hollow passages stuffed with bones. The voices screamed not in anguish but in triumph. Whitlow convulsed, his body jerking as though invisible hands clawed at him from every direction. The lantern shattered in his grasp, fire spilling across his coat, flames licking upward with unnatural speed. His screams filled the chamber, raw and human, no longer composed. The spirits swirled tighter, pressing him against the wall, their blurred faces sharpening for an instant into expressions of wrath and release. Rose petals, blackened and brittle, fell from the ceiling as though the house itself wept its false beauty away. Charity turned from the sight, shielding the infant's face with her hand, whispering, "Do not look." Fletcher's sobs mingled with Whitlow's screams as the chamber blazed with fire and voices. And then silence. Whitlow's cries cut off. The flames vanished. Only smoke lingered, carrying the faint scent of roses turned to ash. When Charity dared to look again, Whitlow was gone. Where he had stood, only a heap of charred cloth remained, and the ledger split down the spine, its pages blackened, its ink bled into nothing. The spirits hovered one last time, their veiled heads bowing toward Charity and the child. Then, like smoke caught in a sudden wind, they dissolved into the cracks of the house. Rosemont was still, but its silence was no longer watchful. It was hollow, empty. For the first time, the house had no master. Dawn broke with a strange gentleness over Rosemont. The mist that had long clung to the garden seemed thinner, less suffocating, as if the land itself exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. The roses in the beds, once unnaturally crimson, looked wilted and grey, their petals drooping as though mourning the spirits who had nourished them. Charity stood in the entry hall, the infant swaddled against her chest. His tiny breath steadied now, no longer shaken by the terror of the night. Fletcher leaned against the stair banister, his face pale, his arm bound in strips of linen torn from Whitlow's discarded robes. He looked older, more fragile, as if years had been stolen from him in a single night. The house no longer whispered, no more footsteps above, no more sighs in the corridors, only silence and the occasional creak of old wood settling. Yet even this silence carried weight, like the hush after a storm that had drowned half the world. Fletcher broke it first. "It will never be the same, will it?" His voice trembled, not only from pain but from a grief he couldn't name. "No," Charity answered. She looked up the grand staircase, where dust now lay undisturbed. "But neither will we." They walked together through the house, every step echoing in chambers stripped of their illusions. In the dining hall, the table where Whitlow had once hosted grand feasts for unseen guests now stood barren. Only scorch marks marred its surface, and in the corner, a silver goblet had melted into a warped lump. In the conservatory, the once blooming roses shriveled into black vines, collapsing into dust at the brush of Charity's hand. When they reached the front door, Charity paused. Her reflection looked back at her in the warped glass pane, eyes hollowed, skin pale but alive. She shifted the child in her arms. His small fingers clutched her dress, grounding her. "He will not grow within these walls," she whispered. "No child will." Fletcher nodded, though his steps faltered as though his body begged him to stay bound to the house, to its secrets. Charity laid her hand firmly on his uninjured shoulder. "It is finished, Fletcher. We bury it here." With a final shove, the heavy oak door groaned open. The morning sun poured inside, its light sharp and unforgiving, revealing every crack, every scar the house had hidden. For the first time, Rosemont looked less like a sanctuary and more like a ruin. Charity stepped across the threshold. The child whimpered once, then quieted, his eyes fluttering open against the brightness. Behind her, Fletcher lingered at the doorway, his gaze fixed on the grand halls one last time. Then, with a shuddering breath, he followed her into the daylight. As the door swung shut behind them, Rosemont seemed to sigh, a sound not of menace but of surrender. Its reign was over, and in that moment, Charity knew the curse had not been lifted. It had been silenced, buried, waiting. For curses do not die, they sleep. The path away from Rosemont was overgrown, as though the land itself had tried to strangle any hope of escape. Vines clung to Charity's skirts, thorns scratching her ankles, yet she pressed on, clutching the infant to her breast. Fletcher limped beside her, each step an act of defiance against the house that had claimed his strength. Behind them, the mansion loomed against the pale morning sky. Its windows, once glowing with unnatural light, were now hollow sockets staring into nothingness. The chimneys no longer smoked, and the garden roses sagged like corpses left unburied. Yet still, Charity did not turn her back fully. She felt its eyes on her, even in ruin. They reached the tree line where the forest began, its canopy swallowing the road in shadow. Fletcher stopped, breathing heavily. His bandaged wrist throbbed, blood already seeping through the linen. "If we leave it standing," he said hoarsely, "someone will return. Another Whitlow. Another congregation of the damned. You know this." Charity looked down at the infant, at the child who had been born of ritual, of blood and soil, yet who now breathed free air. "And if we burn it," she whispered, "we risk releasing what still clings to its bones." Her words quivered with the weight of truth. For even in silence, Rosemont pulsed. She could feel it. The hum beneath the earth, the faint pull on her marrow, as though the house had marked her the moment she defied Whitlow. The infant stirred, his eyes opening again, but this time they glowed faintly in the dim light, a pale shimmer not belonging to any child of flesh alone. Charity gasped, her arms tightening around him. Fletcher saw it too. His lips parted, and for the first time that morning, true terror returned to his face. "It's not over," he breathed. "Dear God, it's not over at all." From the direction of the mansion, a sound carried faintly through the trees, not a scream, not a whisper, a lullaby, soft, mournful, and unmistakable. The same tune the unseen women had once sung in the attic, the same melody that had rocked countless infants into silence before their tiny graves were sealed. The child cooed at the sound, as if recognizing it. Charity's heart hammered. She turned toward Fletcher, her voice steel despite the quake beneath it. "Then we do not run. We fight. We end it at the roots." Fletcher's gaze flicked from the child to the house rising like a corpse in the distance. His lips trembled with exhaustion, with dread, but he nodded, and together, with dawn fading into the first shadows of day, they turned back toward Rosemont. The walk back to Rosemont felt longer than the one that had carried them away. Each step toward the mansion was heavier, as if the ground itself resisted, pulling at their ankles, warning them to turn back. The forest air thickened, the branches knitting together above until daylight dimmed into a twilight haze. Charity's arms ached from the weight of the infant, but she clung to him with a desperation sharper than her fear. His strange glow had faded, yet she could still feel it pulsing faintly against her chest, like a second heartbeat, older, colder, not entirely his own. Fletcher stumbled often, his strength waning, but his eyes burned with the fever of purpose. "If we let it breathe another day," he rasped, "it will take another child, another family. It will never be done." The mansion rose before them once more, half shrouded in fog. Its windows reflected no light, yet behind the panes shadows moved, restless, as though the house anticipated their return. The air around its frame shimmered faintly, like heat off stone, though the morning was cool. Charity's stomach knotted. "It knows." "Yes," Fletcher said, his voice hoarse. "It always knows." They crossed the threshold again. The air inside was different now, stale, heavy with smoke though no fire burned. The silence was gone, the whispers had returned, but fractured, jagged like a choir that had lost its harmony. The names on the walls bled, the carved letters running like wet ink, smearing into one another until they formed no words at all, only a single stain that spread across the clay. The infant stirred in her arms, eyes half open. A sound escaped his lips, not a cry, not a laugh, but a sigh that did not belong to a child, but to something ancient, wary, patient. Fletcher recoiled. "Do you hear it?" Charity nodded, her throat dry. "He's not only ours, he's theirs." They moved toward the cellar doors, the place where it had begun, where Whitlow had fallen, where the house had screamed. Each step downward sent vibrations through the wooden stairs, as though the house shifted beneath them. The air grew colder, thick with the iron tang of blood. When they reached the chamber, the coffins still lay in rows, but now their lids rattled. Thin, skeletal fingers pushed through cracks in the wood. One coffin split entirely, spilling out a body that should have rotted long ago, but its eyes still moved, its mouth opening and closing soundlessly, lips cracked but forming one word again and again: return. The infant's glow flared. His eyes opened wide, shining like twin lanterns in the dark. The coffins shook harder, and the voices rose with him. Fletcher's knees buckled, his hands flying to his ears. "We can't fight this." "Yes," Charity cut him off, her voice shaking with defiance. "We can. But not with steel, not with fire." Her gaze fixed on the ledger, lying where she had stabbed through Whitlow's name. Its pages rippled, though no wind touched them, as if waiting. "The curse began with words," she whispered. "It must end with them." And with the child's light burning brighter in her arms, she stepped toward the book. The ledger waited like a predator disguised as prey. Its cracked leather cover pulsed faintly, the torn page where Charity had driven the quill through Whitlow's name curling inward like a wound that refused to heal. Each line of script shimmered with a dark radiance, names inked in blood, dates carved like epitaphs, destinies bound to the house. Charity knelt before it, the infant pressed against her shoulder. His glow lit the page, and the ink wreathed, letters bending and twisting, forming shapes that almost looked like faces screaming from the parchment. She could smell it now, the iron tang of blood, the sweet rot of roses, the acrid sting of burned flesh. Fletcher hovered behind her, trembling, his breath ragged. "What will you do?" His voice was half plea, half warning. Charity gripped the quill still buried in the page. It resisted when she tugged, as though the book itself clung to the weapon. "This ledger holds them, their names, their chains. If I unwrite them, I unbind them." "But unbind them to where?" Fletcher asked, his voice breaking. "To freedom, or to us." The child stirred, and for a moment Charity thought she heard him answer in a voice not his own. A chorus of whispers layered over each other, echoing through the chamber. "Both." The coffins rattled violently, wood splitting, bones straining to rise. Fingers clawed against the lids, nails splintering, teeth gnashing in the darkness. The chamber walls dripped moisture, crimson seeping through cracks like veins opening. Charity pressed the infant closer to her chest, then ripped the quill free from the page. The moment it tore loose, the room shuddered, the lantern flame bending sideways, as if sucked by a great inhale. She poised the quill above the first name, Whitlow Jeremiah. The ink shimmered, the letters writhing like snakes. She dragged the quill across it, striking it out. The chamber erupted with a scream. Not Whitlow's voice alone, but thousands layered and howling. The coffins burst open, skeletons thrashing violently, only to collapse moments later into heaps of dust. The chains that had bound their names were breaking. She struck through another, and another. Each name erased unleashed another cacophony, a storm of voices both grateful and furious. Some wept, some laughed, some cursed her. The house itself trembled as if foundations centuries old were being torn apart. Fletcher fell to his knees, clutching his ears. "You'll bring the roof down, then let it fall," Charity shouted, her hand flying across the page. "Better rubble than prison." The infant's glow burned brighter with each name she destroyed, his tiny body trembling in her arms, as though the power unbound passed through him. His eyes, wide and unblinking, no longer looked like a child's. When she slashed through the final name, the ledger convulsed in her hands. The pages tore themselves free, whipping into the air like wings of ash, circling the chamber before disintegrating into dust. Silence followed, not the heavy silence of suppression, but an emptiness so vast it rang in her ears. The coffins were gone, the whispers ceased. The house no longer breathed, but the child did, and when Charity looked down at him, she saw the truth in his eyes. The curse had not been destroyed, it had been given flesh. Charity staggered back from the pedestal where the ledger had dissolved, her breath ragged. The infant in her arms was no longer fragile, no longer helpless. His glow had settled, dimming into something steady like embers hidden beneath ash. Yet when his gaze met hers, it was not the gaze of a newborn. It was vast. 1,000 eyes looking through one pair, 1,000 voices held behind a single mouth. Fletcher rose shakily, clutching the wall for balance. His bandages were soaked through, his face pale as bone. But his eyes were fixed on the child. "Dear God," he whispered, "it's all of them. Every soul you freed. Every spirit bound to this house, they've found a vessel." The words cut into Charity like blades. She clutched the child tighter, her heart twisting with both dread and fierce, unyielding love. "No," she said hoarsely. "He's more than them. He's still mine." But as if to test her, the child opened his mouth. Not to cry, but to speak. The sound was broken, unnatural, a chorus overlapping itself, rising and falling in tones no human throat should carry. Words bled through. Mother, keep a curse. The chamber shook violently. The coffins disintegrated to powder, collapsing into the earth. The walls dripped with water as if the ground itself had begun to weep. From above, the beams groaned, dust cascading like sand from an hourglass. Fletcher lurched forward, desperation breaking his fear. Charity, listen to me. He is not yours to raise. He is the house now. He is Whitlow. He is every damned one of them. If you carry him out, you do not end the curse. You carry it into the world. Charity's throat tightened. The child turned his glowing eyes on Fletcher, and Fletcher stumbled back, gagging, as though unseen hands clutched his throat. The air pressed heavy, suffocating, filled with the scent of roses blooming too fast, too violently, petals dropping black before they fully opened. Charity pressed her lips to the infant's forehead. For a heartbeat, she swore she felt only warmth, only skin, only her child. And then she heard the lullaby again. It did not come from the house this time. It came from the child's tiny throat, his voice weaving the same tune the women had sung for generations, soft, mournful, inhumanly perfect. Fletcher collapsed to his knees, his eyes wild. "End it, Charity, end it now! Before he learns to walk, before he learns to speak their names into the world." But Charity stood frozen, torn between the unbearable weight of love and the greater terror of truth. The child was not only hers, he was the graveyard's harvest, the ledger's ink, the voices that had clawed at her mind for nights uncounted. The curse had not slept, it had been reborn. And as the lullaby filled the chamber, Charity realized she would have to choose. To destroy him, or to raise him. Charity's grip around the child tightened until her knuckles whitened. The infant's song vibrated through her bones, sweet yet suffocating, each note thick with centuries of sorrow and malice. It wasn't just a lullaby anymore, it was a summons. The chamber walls quivered, as though the very foundations of Rosemont leaned closer to listen. Fletcher dragged himself upright, swaying like a man half dead. His voice cracked as he pleaded, "Charity, you saw what Whitlow became! If you carry that child into the world, his voice will do what Whitlow only dreamed. It will bind not one house, but every soul it touches." He reached for her, his bandaged hand trembling. "You must end it. Here now." The infant's glow flickered, and he turned his face toward Fletcher. For a moment his features shifted, eyes too large, mouth stretched too wide, as though all the spirits inside him pressed against his flesh, desperate to escape. Fletcher gasped, stumbling back. Charity's heart roared in her chest. She wanted to scream at Fletcher, to strike him, to tell him this child was hers, no matter what darkness he bore. Yet in her mind she saw visions not her own, fields burning, rivers blackening, crowds kneeling in silence as the lullaby spread from one mouth to 1,000, from 1,000 to a nation. The child gurgled, reaching for her face with tiny fingers. When they touched her cheek, a rush of warmth flooded her, memories that weren't hers. A woman rocking her baby in 1792, a boy buried alive in 1814, a midwife forced to smother an infant in 1827. Every child Rosemont had claimed, every life stolen, now thrummed inside this one small body. Her knees buckled. She sank to the ground, clutching him as tears burned her eyes. "They're in him," she whispered. "But he is still mine." "No." Fletcher's shout cracked through the chamber. He seized a jagged piece of coffin wood, brandishing it like a stake. "He is theirs. Charity, if you love him, if you love anyone, you will put an end to this blight before it walks free." Charity looked up at him through her tears, her body trembling, torn in two. Fletcher's eyes burned with a fanatic's desperation, but beneath it lay a grief that mirrored her own. He was not wrong, and yet, could she kill her own son, even if he carried the voices of the damned? The infant's song shifted, softening into a single word, spoken clear and pure from his tiny lips, "Mother." Charity froze. Fletcher staggered, the wood slipping from his grip, clattering to the ground. The sound echoed in the chamber like a gavel. The choice loomed before her, final, absolute. Would she crush the curse in her arms, or cradle it into a future yet unwritten? The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her answer. The silence after the word, "Mother," was more terrible than the lullaby had ever been. It clung to the chamber like smoke, thick and suffocating, pressing against the ribs, the skull, the marrow. Charity could hear Fletcher's ragged breath, the faint crackle of wood as Rosemont's bones shifted overhead. But beneath it all, she heard the child's heartbeat, steady and insistent. He stared at her, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark, and for the first time she wondered if the glow came not from the curse, but from her own refusal to let him go. Fletcher bent, picking up the coffin splinter again. His hands shook, but his voice was iron. "Charity, it ends here. Better by your hand than by the world's. If you falter, he will spread, he will root, and he will not stop until Rosemont is everywhere." Charity rose slowly, cradling the child closer, her body between Fletcher and the infant. Her voice was hoarse, trembling but fierce. "I carried him into this world, Fletcher. I will not carry him out in pieces." Fletcher's face crumpled, grief, fury, and something close to love all twisted together. He lifted the splinter high. "Then forgive me." The child's glow flared. The chamber roared as the walls split, veins of crimson light racing through the clay. The coffins collapsed to dust, their ashes spiraling upward like smoke. A gale of voices shrieked, not in pain but in triumph, and Fletcher froze where he stood, his eyes wide as invisible hands seized him. The infant raised one tiny hand. Fletcher convulsed, the splinter falling from his grasp. His mouth opened in a silent scream as the voices poured through him, shaking his body like a ragdoll before hurling him against the wall. His body slumped, motionless, his head twisted at a terrible angle. Charity gasped, clutching the child, horror and awe battling inside her. "What have you done?" she whispered. The infant turned his glowing eyes toward Fletcher's corpse, then back to her. His lips curled in something almost like a smile. The voices that filled the chamber softened, folding into one. A single voice, clear and cold, spoke from the child's mouth. "I am free, because of you." Charity staggered, her knees buckling. "No, you are not free. You are mine. Do you hear me, mine?" The child's expression shifted, pity, amusement, and hunger all woven together. "Then raise me, mother, raise me well, for the world will be ours." Above them, Rosemont groaned, its timbers snapping, its walls cracking open as if the house itself was bowing to its new master. Dust rained down, the chamber shuddering. Charity pressed the child to her chest, sobs choking her throat. The curse had not been destroyed. It had chosen her, and she knew then she would not kill him. She would raise him, even if it meant raising the end of the world. The chamber split down its spine with a thunderous crack, and daylight speared through the earth above, flooding the crypt in a shaft of raw gold. For a moment the light touched the child's face, and his glow dimmed, swallowed by the sun. He whimpered, curling closer to Charity's breast, as though the sky itself scorched him. Charity staggered toward the opening. The ground shook beneath her boots, every step an effort against the house's final resistance. Rosemont wailed around her, a sound like 1,000 doors slamming, like walls tearing themselves apart. Dust and splinters fell in torrents. The mansion was collapsing. Fletcher's body lay broken in the shadows, half buried in the dust of the coffins. She did not look back. She could not. With a final heave, she climbed into the open air. The gardens were in ruin, roses blackened, soil cracked and steaming, the once proud hedges reduced to withered stalks. Behind her, Rosemont groaned one last time before the roof caved in on itself, beams snapping, bricks tumbling. A storm of ash rose into the morning sky, blotting the sun. Charity stumbled into the field, the infant clutched to her chest, his glow returning in the shadow of the smoke. She fell to her knees, the earth soft beneath her palms, her breath tearing in gasps. The child cooed, reaching up to touch her chin with tiny fingers. His eyes burned faintly, two pale embers. His voice, though soft, echoed with depth not of this world. "It begins." Charity's tears streamed unchecked down her cheeks. She pressed her lips to his forehead, whispering, "No. Not like before. Not like him. You will not be Whitlow. You will be mine." The infant blinked slowly as though weighing her words, and in his silence she felt the burden of countless souls pressing against her, waiting for her to falter, to let them speak. The wind shifted. From the forest beyond the field, figures appeared, villagers drawn by the collapse, their faces pale with awe and terror. They saw Charity, ash-streaked, kneeling in the dirt with a child in her arms while Rosemont's ruins smoldered behind her. One man whispered, "The witch has birthed the fire." Another, crossing himself, murmured, "The child of the house lives." Their fear spread quickly, a ripple through the crowd. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others turned and fled. None dared approach her. Charity rose slowly, her back straight, her arms wrapped protectively around the infant. She felt their eyes burn into her, branding her already with names: witch, curse, mother of ruin. But she walked forward anyway, past their trembling forms, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The child's glow brightened in her arms, and his voice whispered in her ear alone, "They will kneel, mother. All of them will kneel." And Charity, though her heart quaked, did not silence him. She only held him tighter. Charity did not return to the village. She walked past it, through its fields and fences, through its terrified stairs and whispered prayers. Behind her, Rosemont lay in ruin, yet she felt its presence still, threads of it woven into her blood, into the breath of the child in her arms. The villagers would tell stories. They already had. The witch who burned her own house to the ground. The doctor who betrayed God and was swallowed by the earth. The child born of graves, glowing with the light of the damned. And though they feared her, though they crossed themselves when she passed, none dared raise a hand against her. For the infant's eyes watched them, and in that gaze was something older than kingdoms. Nights turned to weeks, weeks into months. Charity wandered, never resting long in one place. She learned quickly that the child did not cry for food like other babes. He drank, but not enough to live, not by nature's laws. And yet he grew. His words came early, sentences spoken with clarity at an age when most children only babbled. At times his voice was his own. At others it carried the weight of 1,000 throats. And always, always he sang. That same lullaby, the song that had rocked generations into silence beneath Rosemont's soil. Charity wept often, though never in his sight. She told herself she could shape him, bend him away from the darkness that had birthed him. That her love might be stronger than Whitelow's curse, stronger than the weight of every soul clawing for release inside him. But deep within she knew the truth. Love could not erase what he was. Love could only guide what he would become. One night, as they rested beside a river, the child pressed his head against her chest and whispered, "Mother, when I am grown, will the world be mine?" Charity's lips trembled. She did not answer. She only kissed his hair and rocked him slowly, her silence an answer of its own. Far away, where Rosemont's ashes still stained the earth, roses bloomed again, redder than blood, sharper than knives. And so the curse lived on, not in stone, not in ledger, not in whispered names carved into clay walls, but in flesh, in the child who walked the world, and in the mother who could not bring herself to stop him.